The Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA, defers deportation proceedings for 2 years for people who were brought to the U.S. illegally when they were children. Known as Dreamers, the estimated 800,000 registered with the program live today with uncertainty as to whether they can remain in the only country that many of them have ever known. In partnership with the American Leadership Forum, joining us to discuss DACA and the potential implications of mass deportation are Mexico's Consul General in Sacramento, Liliana Ferrer, and Marco Rodriguez, Chairman of the Board of the Mexican Cultural Center of Northern California. Next on Studio Sacramento.
At Five Star Bank, we create thoughtful solutions to help the Capital Region thrive, from economic development and education to public health and safety, issues that are vitally important to Sacramento's prosperity. We're proud to be part of the conversation and hope you'll join in.
Madam Consul General, regardless of age, what's wrong with sending people home who are in this country illegally?
Scott, what's wrong is that we're talking about human beings that have made the United States their home, human beings that many of them have never been to their countries of origin. Some of them don't even speak the language. And what is wrong as well is that in discussing a very human issue, we're talking about a group of people that recent rhetoric and the discussion that is taking place today about doing away with the DACA program has created a tremendous and very worrisome level of fear, of anxiety, and of stress amongst youngsters that had felt the moral obligation and responsibility of staying in this country with work permits and with school permits and looking forward towards a future that would be much better than today.
Marco, isn't a country allowed to control its borders though?
You know, they are to a certain way. Absolutely, they're in the right to do that, and that's a policy that's higher than what we're talking about here. But I think what's really wrong amongst a lot of things is the breaking up of the families. Some of these young adults have younger brothers and sisters, so they don't want to live away from, or their parents. Some of these are already adults that have their own families, you know, and we are hearing constantly in the news how these families are being broken up. So I just think it's just incredible how the government is even thinking about deporting 800,000 people out of the country and what it would do for us as Americans here mortally. You know, these are people that are living next to us. These are people we care about. You know, we're working with them.
Who are these dreamers, the people that are affected by DACA?
You know, you'd be surprised, you know, of who these dreamers are, because a lot of people see them as integrated. They speak English like you and I. They're working, they're driving around, they're going to school, they're professionals, you know, and they have businesses already. They're being successful. They're doing everything that you and I want to do as an American dream, which is grow good with this country. So I was recently surprised to learn that one of the main characters in the upcoming movie, you know, is a DACA student.
What upcoming movie?
The Black Panther. You know, and this individual came out and said, I'm a DACA student, you know. So here is a big primetime Hollywood movie with a key star in its movie is a DACA student.
Wait, which character?
The main character.
The Black Panther himself?
Yeah, exactly.
That's actually interesting because many of us, Madam Consul General, tend to think of the Dreamers as solely a population whose origins come from Mexico, but I guess that's not true.
Well, Scott, we have, like you said, 800,000 plus DACAs. Most of them are Mexicans, 500, but that's just the nature of the relationship. We're neighbors. We have been, we are, and we will be neighbors forever. But when you review the statistics of the numbers of DACA recipients, you will see that there are some that are from France, 400 of them, X hundred of them from Italy. Many countries in Europe are represented, obviously countries from other parts of the world as well. So I think that when we start framing a term and an individual, you know, in a certain way, particularly when it's done negatively, it creates great harm to a society and the community as a whole. A second ago, you were mentioning, doesn't the U.S. have the rights to control its borders? Of course it does. It is a sovereign right of every nation, not only to control its borders, but to secure its borders. But here we're talking about a community, like Marco said, that has integrated, that has assimilated better than anyone else into the U.S. Society. And for those of you that didn't have the chance to take a look at the New York Times of last Friday, there was a beautiful quote of the day that was printed that was a quote by a DACA. Of the group of DACAs, around 9,000 of them are teachers, mostly women. In this case, it was a young DACA teacher that, quote, she said something like this, in today's world, immigrants are expected to be perfect. Immigrants are expected to save children from buildings that are on fire. But all I want to do, and she, by the way, is a special ed educator, special ed teacher, all I want to do is go to school every day, to go to the school where I teach, and teach an American to be a great American. So that, I think, is very powerful and very strong as to the loyalty and to the love that these people have for this country.
No doubt, but at the same time, if you listen to other assertions, for instance, in the President's State of the Union address, he talked about the presence of MS-13 and that a number of the gang members in MS-13 either would have qualified or did qualify for DACA status. And he's talking about how it is that we have people in this country that are here illegally that are actually causing mayhem. How do you answer the charge?
You know, I think in all groups of people, you're going to find some bad apples. You know, it could be a group of 1,000 people. We're going to find some individuals that are willing to take advantage of our goods and services, of our good gestures. You know, so I don't think we need to generalize because somebody did something bad. Okay, 800,000 people are bad people. You know, in fact, I would say that of the 800 people, the high percentage are great individuals. You know. So where else can you select 800,000 people and say, like, hey, these are amongst the best people? And, you know, obviously some of the people are going to change. Even a great person today, by next Monday, whatever happened over the weekend, could be a horrible person just because different things happen in their livelihood. So, you know, you come across a bad person and it's going to bring out the worst in you. So we can't generalize just about one person did and, oh, okay, everybody of this group of people is going to be bad and do terrible things to our neighbors.
I think what Marco is saying is very important. You have to be very careful with generalizations of any nationality, of any ethnic group, of any religion, gender. Be very careful with generalizations because it's not a matter of going back and forth. If someone starts talking about Mexicans being bad hombres or MS-13 members, for that matter, or Mexicans start talking about Americans in a way that, you know, there are many Americans that might be trying to avoid the law and then they escape and go to Mexico and cross the border and stay there somewhere hidden. You know, we have large communities of American nationals that reside in Mexico, and we start pointing fingers at each other. I don't think that takes us anywhere positive. I think that we should deal with those human beings, whatever their nationality is, that have committed crimes, and have the law deal with those human beings accordingly. But I think the wider picture here in the relationship between Mexico and the United States is that we should educate ourselves, Americans, about what Mexico is and what Mexicans are, and Mexicans about what the U.S. is and what Americans are. Let me just share quickly with you that in 2016, there was a poll taken from Mexicans saying, what do you think about Americans at the end of 2016? And about 80% of them said they're great. We love them. Great neighbors. 6 months later, the poll was taken again. and that 80% had gone down to 35%.
35%.
35%. So we need to educate both of our peoples of who we are, what we represent, and why our relationship is so important. Like I said a second ago, we are neighbors, we will be neighbors, and I think the dialogue and understanding and education is crucial in any situation anywhere in the world.
Well, based on, since 2016, the position of the U.S. government, what do you think the U.S. government, or what does Mexico think the U.S. government is representing on the issue of DACA?
Well, the Mexican government is very hurt, and not only the Mexican government, the Mexican people, from the poll results that I just shared with you, is very hurt with the rhetoric that is taking place at certain levels of the government and in certain parts of the country. We are in California, and that's again going back to how important it is to educate. Not all of the United States has been hurtful to Mexico. California, in many ways, as so many other parts of the country, have been expressing messages of solidarity, of understanding. The Mexican consulate has partnered, and not only my consulate or our consulate in Sacramento, but many consulates around the United States have partnered with U.S. organizations that are interested in human rights and civil rights and defending what is correct.
Madam Consul General, I understand that, but the argument is, if these DACA dreamers are so great, and the majority of them come from Mexico, why is there even a discussion about this? Your government should want these people back.
Mexico would love to have them back. Why on earth wouldn't a country be ecstatic at the fact that over 500,000 of its nationals are sent back, and not only are sent back, but they are some of the best and the brightest and the most ambitious in the most positive sense of the word. And not only that, they're also trained and skilled and educated. This country has invested in them. So obviously Mexico would love to have them back, but this is not about what Mexico wants. This is about what is right, and what is right for human beings that are the DACAs, and what they want and what is best for their lives. And these are wonderful kids that have contributed to this country, that study, most of them are studying and working, that have expectations to continue contributing to this great country of theirs, because they feel that they're Americans and they would love to remain here.
Does it bother you that they feel that they're Americans?
Not at all, not at all. I understand it fully. It's the natural feeling. Not at all.
Marco, I just wanted to ask you, you've been a leader in the community at large and in the Mexican-American community for decades, and you talk to these kids. What are they saying to you? What are they thinking and feeling right now?
They're scared, they're very sad, and I think that they're feeling disappointed. They're feeling disappointed about our American government. You know, whether you're Republican or Democrat, you know, how come they can't get along and get to a solution? Because they're just disappointed. And if I was hiding in the shadows prior to this, and as a promise was said, hey, fill out this paperwork. Now the government knows where I am. They have my driver's license. They know where I'm going to school. Before they didn't know where I was, but now they know where I'm at. So I'm scared, you know, because if this policy does not get fixed, you know, I've come out of the shadows.
And as a matter of fact, the 800,000 that complied and registered, is there a feeling that they were suckers? Because actually the number of people who would have qualified for the program, I've heard, you know, tale that it's upwards of 1.3, 1.5 million. And so the folks who didn't register might be thinking to themselves, well, that's the bonus.
Scott, in that regard, if I may, that's a very important point that you just made, because a day after the cancellation of DACA was announced back in September, I invited a group of DACAs to the consulate to talk with them and to ask them what was their main concern. What worried them the most that need to be addressed immediately? And the answer of the first gentleman that raised his hand said, Consul General, my concern is what will happen to my parents. I came forth, I applied, I gave my personal information, and I got DACA. But now the government has my information, and I feel guilty that now I'm giving my parents up, and they're going to be hurt by this situation. So let's see how we can help our parents. So they were not concerned about themselves. They were concerned about their family. And going back to this issue, it's a human issue. These kids have feelings, these kids have families, they have parents, they've been living here for all their lives, and we need to see this issue as such.
We've got a deadline of March 5th coming up when the current arrangement, this whatever grace period expires. What are the implications if Congress and the administration don't get a solution in place?
You know, in regards to the implication, I don't think they've thought it through. You know, how can they not address such a huge issue in Congress, you know? Because this is a huge economic issue for America. You know, as Liliana was mentioning, you know, not only the young adults in DACA, but their parents, you know, and all these people. We're at the lowest unemployment there has ever been in America. So how can we, again, we're lacking people to work, you know, to work hard in our businesses. And now we deport, you know, millions of people potentially out of this, because a lot of these young people, if 800,000 people leave, you know, their parents are probably going to leave too. They're going to say, hey, these are people that I love, and we're going to stay together. And in Mexico, here we come, and, you know, but yet, you know, if I'm an employer and I'm counting on my workers, you know, as we saw just recently in the news, you know, it's already happening where, you know, the ICE, you know, are showing up to different places just to investigate, but the employers are being forced, hey, you know, and we're counting on this labor, you know, we're counting on this professional, and a lot of people, my parents were farm workers, you know, and I'm a son of a farm worker, so, you know, they were part of the program back then, and I came here legally, and I'm fortunate, but I grew up, you know, saying by my parents, you must go to college, you must do this, you must do good for America, because they've taken care of me in our family. So that's how a lot of these young adults are growing up. You know, they really want to try hard and give back to America.
I think that what needs to be highlighted, Scott, as well, is that talking about college, most of these kids are college students or college graduates.
Really?
Many of them are working on their masters and their PhDs. And with this discussion going on, those, for example, 500 of them are at UC Davis, and with masters and PhDs. And with the discussion going on of the possibility of DACA being canceled, some of them have 1 year to go in finishing their PhD, and they're very concerned. What will happen if suddenly the programs are cut and the authorization is gone?
Madam Consul General, what do you think is most misunderstood by the American people about this population?
I think that what is most misunderstood is that they are some sort of foreign group where in reality they're your neighbor, and they're your kid's friend at school, and they're your kid's teacher at school, and they're the nurse that took care of you when you hurt yourself at the hospital. These are members of your community. These are fellow Americans for that matter. And they're just asking for a chance to continue their lives that the way they've been living it, being part of your community and being your good neighbor.
And let alone also contributing to our tax system via payroll taxes. You know, these are individuals that have been working for businesses and contributing to our tax system. So here, you know, we have individuals that have been contributing for years and years, and now they get deported. You know, what happens to all those resources that have been put aside by their hard labor? And
paying taxes, but also members of the military. Many
there are dreamers that are members of the military?
Many dreamers, but many Mexican migrants that are offered the opportunity to serve in the U.S. military
didn't
and
know
that
that.
sign up, yes, and sometimes have one tour of duty or 2 tours of duty, and by doing that, they're able to regularize or start a process or procedure of regularizing their situation or remain here
Incidentally,
temporarily.
given the fact that March 5th is this deadline date, has the administration or some aspect of the U.S. government been in contact with the government of Mexico, to your knowledge, in terms of how, if this came to pass, that there was a mass deportation, how it would work? That's a lot of people.
That is a lot of people, not to my knowledge. It's a lot of people, yes.
And I don't think they've thought through the process, the infrastructure of how to even achieve this, you know. But it's going to be a daunting task, you know, to even get, you know. I can't even imagine how they wouldn't come up with a solution already or any proposal. It just seems like as soon as we hear that somebody's going to put up a proposal, it gets shot down that same day.
Now, Marco, I'm curious. Last week, the Trump administration floated a new proposal to solve the DACA issue. And from their perspective, they consider it to be extremely generous to people that are interested in the discussion. It calls for a 12-year path to citizenship for 1.8 million immigrants, which is far more than the 800,000 that are registered with DACA. It also calls for $25 billion put toward the wall proposal to create a wall between the United States and Mexico. And it also eliminates what is called chain migration, which I guess is the term that is used for when people bring families with them. From the perspective of the administration, it's very generous. What say you?
You know, I think it's an interesting proposal, and it definitely is more generous than what was originally proposed, which is just a 2-year program for a certain amount of individuals. So in regards to the wall, my own personal perception is that it wouldn't stop the illegal immigration because, you know, but actually would create a lot of jobs in my perception, you know, because that was a lot of people going to work and building the big wall.
You are always a businessman, aren't you?
You know? I mean, I'm all for creating jobs, you know. I mean, you're talking from the engineering to all the supplies to everybody has to produce all the goods and services. And as I mentioned earlier, we're in a state of mind where unemployment is at an all-time low. So we got to find more people. So not only is that going to create jobs, but I think obviously the problem that I have with that is that illegal immigration in the United States is 12 million individuals, and here we're talking about less than 10% of that number, you know. So I'm very disappointed in our government that they can't address a bigger problem. They're focusing on a little issue which is very important.
Well, let's talk about the bigger problem for a second, because what it raises is that whatever is done on the DACA issue has broad implications for a larger issue of whether or not people are here legally or not and what happens to them. Has the Mexican government taken a position on the current proposals by the administration?
Well, I think that here what is being discussed goes way beyond DACA. It doesn't only have to do with the DACA youngsters, but it has to do with immigration policy in general and legal immigration policy in the medium and long term. That is as a domestic issue of the United States, and that is for the U.S. to decide. Just like the wall is. The wall is a non-issue for Mexico. As far as Mexico is concerned, the United States can build a wall. It's within its territory.
Well, but supposedly your government's going to pay for it.
If I may just add, it's a non-issue because it's inside the U.S., but it's also a non-issue because if the U.S. wants to spend its taxpayers' dollars in that or any other project, it's up to the United States and to the U.S. taxpayers.
I believe that they want to spend your taxpayers' dollars.
Well, then I think the answer is perfectly clear. If I just said that it's a non-issue for Mexico and it's going to be built inside the United States, then it's up to the United States to figure out how they will,
You know, Scott, and I
deal
think
with
that
that.
what she was mentioning is true, is that $25 billion, you know, a lot of Americans feel that they can better be used in other places. You know, inside America, we have a lot of other problems that can be addressed with that kind of money. You know, so why build a wall when there's a lot of things that we can fix?
And obviously, I know Marco very well, and he is a very good businessman. And if they were going to ask him for his business advice, I'm sure he would advise that that very significant amount of money be spent in businesses that could be much more profitable than that.
And more effective. You know, again, we're talking about, you know, building the better America, and what better way to do is to analyze, you know, how does the government spend the money and make it better for Americans, you know, and make it better for all of the population.
And I think that we'll leave it there. Thank you both.
Thank you.
And that's our show. Thanks to our guests and thanks to you for watching Studio Sacramento. I'm Scott Syphax. See you next time right here on KVIE.
At Five Star Bank, we create thoughtful solutions to help the Capital Region thrive, from economic development and education to public health and safety, issues that are vitally important to Sacramento's prosperity. We're proud to be part of the conversation and hope you'll join in.
All episodes of Studio Sacramento, along with other KVIE programs, are available to watch online at kvie.org.